time for people to join. While we're doing that, let me tell you a little bit about me. So yeah, I'm the corporate and workplace services lead here at the LightHouse Arabia. I work with clients experiencing a range of common mental health difficulties, including anxiety, depression, and I work extensively with people from the corporate community who may be experiencing or at risk of experiencing burnout and work-related stress, and that forms a good deal of the work I do here at the LightHouse Arabia. We also support a number of, a lot of individual organisations, multinational companies, blue chip companies, etc., providing workplace interventions when it comes to mental health and well-being. So that's a little bit about me. I can see we've got a lot of people here now, which is wonderful. So I'm going to make a start in a moment. For those of you that may have joined late or a little bit late, my name is Dr. Robert Chandler, Corporate and Workplace Services Lead here at the Lighthouse. So I'm really excited to be here with you today to talk about the concept of values. And it's a concept, it's an idea that's really sort of close to my heart, I think, sort of both professionally and personally as well. We'll set the scene in a moment for what values are, why they're important, how they can sort of transform us both personally and also professionally. So we'll dive into that in a moment. But by way of a bit of background, I suppose the concept of values is really important in psychology in general. But today's talk really comes from the perspective of an approach we use called acceptance and commitment therapy, which talks a lot about values and the importance of values. So today's presentation really is grounded in that approach. You can see our social media accounts for more information on acceptance and commitment therapy. But this concept of values really does come through or from that approach. Again, I can see the numbers have increased even more so since I started talking. Welcome to all of you. My name is Dr. Robert, clinical psychologist and corporate lead here at the Lighthouse. So I'm going to talk for sort of probably about 30 minutes actually, and then I'm going to allow sort of 15, 20 minutes for questions and answers as well. If you've got questions, please pop them in the chat box and I will answer them after I go through the presentation. So yeah, do bear that in mind. Right, I'm going to share my deck with you and we will make a start. So, values in action. Here we go. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the LightHouse Arabia. We are the largest mental health and wellbeing clinic here in the United Arab Emirates. Many of you will be familiar with our social media and hearing about us. We're a team of 30 clinicians from a range of different occupational groups, psychotherapy, psychiatry, OT and speech therapy. We serve clients across the lifespan, the full lifespan. We're the only licensed provider of mental health first aid. Again, you can see our website to find out more about mental health first aid. We're the only provider here in the UAE of that program. We have community at the heart of absolutely everything we do, hence why we are all here today. And we're also home to the Raimi Grief Centre as well. So if it is after today that you know somebody who's struggling with grief, we offer a number of free of charge grief support services. So again, you can see our website for more information on that. So that's us at a glance. I won't tell you or go into any more detail about us. That's our magnificent team here at the Lighthouse. As I say, we're a large and diverse group. Okay, let's get into it. So let's set the scene. This is a quote I really like. It's the idea that the only behaviour that is absolutely certain to occur is the behaviour that is happening now. Okay? The only behaviour that is absolutely certain to occur is the behaviour that is happening in this present moment. So as human beings, we are masters of intention. We come up with all sorts of good intentions for ourselves. I will go to the gym tomorrow. I will see that friend at the weekend. I will update my resume to look for a new job. I will do all of these things. These are all very future-based, okay? And we need to have future-based plans. That's really important as human beings. But what I also know is that human beings also often do not fulfill some of those things. Okay, we can put things off, we can procrastinate on behaving. So I really want you to get into the headspace of understanding that the only behavior that is certain to begin is the behavior that is happening now. This will make sense as we go through the presentation today. But what we're grounding ourselves here in is the idea of the present moment. Okay, the present moment is all we have got. Okay, we can have all kinds of good intentions for how we are going to behave in the future, but unless we are behaving that way now, everything else is kind of irrelevant. Okay, so really, we want to be behaving in the present moment as human beings. We want to be doing things now rather than sort of putting things off. Now, a really sort of good example of this is, you know, a lot here at the clinic, people will come and they will say to me things like, you know, when I feel less anxious, then I will go to that party. Or when I feel motivated, then I will go to the gym. This is the wrong way around, okay? So behavior comes first and mindset will often catch up. Okay, so, you know, a good example of this. When I feel motivated, then I will go to the gym. No, drag yourself to the gym now, because that's the only behavior that is certain to occur. Drag yourself there now, even if you do not feel like it. Maybe not now if you're at work, but you get the point. Wake up, drag yourself there now, do your workout, and you will find that you feel then the motivation. Ah, that run felt good. I'm going to do that again the next day. So if we are waiting for our mindset to be a particular way, we will often be waiting a very long time. So what I will often say to clients is the behavior needs to happen now and the mindset will catch up with that. Now that can be very difficult for us, okay, because we don't feel like going to that party. We might not feel like going to the gym. We might not feel like updating our resume. But unless we do it now, it is not necessarily going to happen. So the only behavior that is certain to begin is the behavior that is happening now. So why is this important? Well, let's have a think about what values are. You've all tuned in today to hear about this idea of values. So what are they? Well, let me tell you what they are not to begin with. Values are not achievements. They are not a destination. Okay? They are a process. They are an ongoing journey. They are not accolades, achievements, or one-off events. Okay? So if I hold the value of sort of mindfulness, for example, and I engage in some kind of meditation, that's great. I may have acted in a way that's consistent with that value, but in order to live that value of mindfulness, I want to be living that every single day on an ongoing basis. So they are not this idea of a one-off event or a one-off achievement. Indeed, there will be situations where we do sort of achieve that value momentarily, but then of course, you know, we move on and it's a case of keeping that behavior going. So values are ways of acting on an ongoing basis, and they are the drivers of our behavior. I'm going to talk more about this in a moment, but every behavior you engage in, I would argue, is driven by some kind of value. Okay, so every deliberate behavior you engage in is driven from a place of value. So let me give you some examples of this. If I value ecology, so if I value the environment and taking care of the environment, that value is the driver of me recycling, of me taking the metro instead of driving to work, you know, watching my water consumption, not running too deep a bath. So the value underpins the behavior, much like connection with others. If I value connecting with people, the behavior may be going to the cinema, going to that party, spending time with the people I love. The value always underpins the behavior. Creativity, if I value creativity, I may write music, I may do some painting, whatever it is. That is the activity or the occupation, and there is always a value that is driving that. Now, this might be a bit of a head shift for many of you, because often we go about our day-to-day lives and we know that we do things, and we know that those things might bring us some pleasure or some joy, but we're often not clear about what is the value that is driving this behavior. And I just ask you for a moment as you're watching this, just reflect on this for a moment. Think about a task or an activity or a hobby that you enjoy. What are the values that underpin that behavior? So if it is that you enjoy, I don't know, going shopping with family, is there a value driving that of connection with other people, or of excitement, or of pleasure? What is the value that drives those particular behaviors? And again, I hope if you walk away from today's talk with nothing else, I hope you do walk away with more than this, but this is a key idea, that underlying every behavior we engage in is some kind of value. So here are some examples of values. What I'm going to do is we're going to email out a link for a couple of websites that you can go to do a values assessment. All right, so it's not a sort of a psychometric test or anything like that, but an opportunity for you to go through a list of different values, to think about what are my values that are important to me. Here's just some examples. This list is not exhaustive. Okay, there are many hundreds, if not thousands, of potential values that we might hold. But something about, I'm not going to read them all, but spirituality, wealth, kindness, solitude, having fun. This is a value, right? Being in nature, fitness, trying to be authentic, trying to have some sort of humility or humanity. Doing things in moderation. This is a value that might drive or guide our behavior. Humor, adventurousness, creativity, flexibility. So we can see that there are a real vast array of potential values. Now, you will be sat watching this now thinking, what are my values? Okay, what is it that is important to me, that drives my behavior? And what I'm going to argue to you is that you have a choice about what your values are. Some values will come easier to us than others, perhaps because of the way we've been brought up or what society tells us should be important to us. But I'm going to argue that you have the ability to choose what your values are. Now, that can be a bit of a head shift for some of us, okay? Because some of us may not have always been into fitness or health, okay? You have the ability to say, actually, I am choosing to incorporate this value of fitness into my life. I understand why it might be beneficial for me. I'm going to hold it as a value and I am going to act. We don't want to be restricted by, firstly, what society tells us our values should be, but also from our own view of who we are and what is important to us. You have the ability to choose that. So you may be looking at this and thinking, take the example of balance. I've never been a balanced person, all right? I've always lived life at the sort of extreme ends of the spectrum. I can't possibly think about balance as a value that I hold. You can choose for balance to be a value of yours, and you can start acting in a way that is consistent with that value. So we don't want to be restricted by what we think of ourselves or what society tells us we should be. So why is this concept of values important? The research is really quite conclusive in this, in that when we lead a life that is consistent with our values, that is where we are acting in a way that is consistent with our values, we generally experience a higher life satisfaction and more meaning in our lives. And that word meaning is really key. We are living in a way that is consistent with our values. Our life generally holds more meaning. We may feel more fulfilled in our life. If we can get to the end of the day, knowing what our sort of 10 or 12 really key values are, if we can get to the end of the day and say, I lived that value today, I lived that other value today, I lived all of those values in some way today, we get to the end of the day and we might think, that's been a good day, okay? Even if it's been a difficult day, even if it's been a hard day, even if we've not achieved a good deal, if we have lived in a way that is consistent with our values, that has brought us a sense of meaning, richness, and connection, okay? So, bottom line, living a life that is sort of values consistent will lead to life satisfaction. Importantly, we can continue to live a values-led life even when really difficult stuff is happening around us. Okay, so even though we may have anxiety, we may feel depressed, or we may be at the risk of burnout because we're working too many hours, if we can still go about our lives on a day-to-day basis, living in a way that is consistent with our values, even with this difficult stuff going on, we can continue to live in a way that feels meaningful. Because for those of you, and I'm sure there will be people joining us today who have experienced a period of anxiety or a period of depression, living in a values-led way can be really difficult. It can be really tough. But if we can hold the anxiety or the depression here, and we can keep behaving or acting in a way that feels like the person we are, this can make the anxiety or the depression a little bit lighter. It doesn't make it go away, but it means that we can continue to move forward, living a rich and meaningful life despite the difficult stuff that is happening. Why also is it important? We psychologists often talk about the idea of ego strength. Who am I? And clients, again, will often come to the clinic and say, I don't know who I am. I don't feel I have a solid sense of who I am authentically within inside of myself. And I think that's a really sensible question to be asking. But I think another really helpful question to ask is, who do you want to be? What's important to you? What do you want to be important to you that isn't now? And when we have a really strong sense of what our values are, and they are guiding our behavior, and we are acting on them daily, that really does give us a very strong sense of who I am. And the more we are doing it consistently, the more we are living by our values every single day, the easier it becomes. First, it might feel a bit mechanical if we're trying to incorporate that value of fitness, for example, and it feels like a real slog or a real effort every single day. But if we get to a point where we are able to incorporate it every day, it becomes easier. We have a stronger sense of who we are as a result. So values really fundamental. What gets in the way of us living a values-led life? Many of us will run on autopilot, every day, and this is normal, and this is common, that we just go about our day-to-day business on autopilot. So we might need to drop the kids off, we might need to then get to work, we might do our job, we have our lunch, we go home, we have our dinner, we put the kids to bed, we go to sleep. And it might feel as though that routine is sort of just laid out for us, and we might not be quite so present. So if we do have a strong sense of obligation or responsibility for different areas of our life, and we're running on autopilot, it can be difficult to say, actually, I'm going to interrupt that routine, and I'm going to behave or act in a different way. Stress or anxiety may get in the way of us living a values-led life. And again, I don't want to sort of come to this talk with the idea that it's really easy to live a values-led way or values-led life if you're experiencing high levels of anxiety. It's not. It's not easy at all. And when we are feeling really overwhelmed or really stressed or not being able to think clearly, or symptoms of anxiety, it can be really difficult to think, right, I'm going to interrupt this. I'm going to go out and do something that's going to bring me meaning. And often people will say, even though I go out and do something in accordance with my values, I still feel anxious. And I might often say, I would expect you to still feel anxious. But it might mean that the anxiety is just a little bit lighter because you're offsetting some of that anxiety with something that may well bring you a sense of fulfillment or meaning despite the anxiety. When we feel tired, when we feel lethargic, when we feel worn out, this can get in the way of us again interrupting those difficult confines of day-to-day life. Again, I've already sort of spoke to this, but the idea of if we have lots of responsibilities and obligations to other people, it can be difficult to sort of prioritize time to be able to act on our values. And so the sort of restrictions that may be put on us by the outside world may prevent us acting on our values. And maybe if we've grown up in a society or a culture that doesn't value something that actually we do value, there can be a societal expectation that we shouldn't be engaging in that, that's not important. And there can be this mismatch between what society tells us is important and what we kind of feel in our hearts is important in terms of our values. And our childhood selves. This is something important that gets in the way as well. As we go through life, we build up this sort of mental representation of who we are, what's important to us, what's not important to us. And that is inevitable that will happen, but that can sometimes be restricted when we want to shift course, we want to do something differently, we want to prioritize something else. So how do we do it? I'm going to encourage you as much as possible to step outside of what society says you should value, as much as feels possible. What do I value? And almost start with a blank sheet of paper, a blank canvas. If I ask myself that question, what sets my soul on fire? What could I not compromise on in terms of values? What is really down here? And just jot some of those things down. Okay, but literally start with a blank sheet of paper. I would always say, do this yourself. Don't ask other people, okay, what your values are, because I think often people themselves will have a representation of who you are and how you should act. So start this activity with yourself. As I said, the card sort activity or the values assessment, we're going to send out an email with the links to these where you can go through some of those. But what I would say is go through some of those assessments. Then, they and people often say, how long do they take? Well, they take as long as they take. But what I would say is don't think about it too much. Okay, so when you were looking at that list a minute ago and you saw those values, which values just jumped out at you as something important? Okay, so try not to overthink it too much. And a few side notes on those activities as well. Hold this phrase I quite like, hold values loosely, but pursue them passionately. So values will change as we go through different parts of our lives. We may get to our 30s or our 40s, and we've made it to the top of the sort of corporate ladder, and we sort of look around and we kind of go, okay, is this it? Maybe I need to start valuing some different stuff now. And I, again, sort of clinically often find that people, when they get to that sort of 30, 40 mark, might think, right, I'm going to pursue something completely different, or I haven't valued creativity up until this point, or I haven't valued fitness up until this point. I'm going to change direction a little bit. So hold values loosely, pursue them passionately. Have a strong sense of what your group of values are today. And I would say, when you're going through the card sorts, the values assessments, I would say try and have a list of about somewhere between 8 and 12 core values, right? 8 to 12 sort of maximum. When you go through some of those activities, it can be really easy to say, oh yeah, that's important, and sort of you end up with a list of sort of 50 or 60. Really try and refine it down to 8 to 10, 8 to 12, because as we'll come on to find out about in a moment, having that more succinct list can be quite helpful when we're thinking about guiding our behaviour. So hold them loosely, but pursue them passionately. Right? So values change as we grow and as we go through our life, and be prepared for that. Something you valued 10, 15 years ago, you might not value as much now. Let go of expectation. This is a big one. I don't go to the gym, therefore I don't value fitness. Not true. You can hold the value of fitness and still not be going to the gym. And often that's where some of the disconnect will occur in your mind, where you do value something, but you're not acting in that way. That's often where sort of stress or frustration or self-criticism shows up, because we know we do value something. Good example, let me give you a personal example. I really value conscientiousness. Okay. So being considerate of other people, right? But when I don't act in a way, which does happen, when I don't act in a way that's consistent with that value, I feel stressed, I feel self-critical, I feel like I haven't done a good job. And that feeling is quite good, because it motivates me to continue to live that value of conscientiousness. Right? So just because we have not behaved or acted in a way that is consistent with that value does not mean that it is not a value of ours. And usually actually the opposite is true. So if it is that you haven't been to the gym or worked out for a year, you know, it doesn't mean that you don't hold that value. Some values, so things, particularly things like wealth or authority or power, for instance, may not be valued by everybody, right? But it's okay if you do. This idea of becoming familiar with your own personal values is really important. So as I say, start with that blank sheet of paper. Don't involve others to begin with. Just think, what does drive me on a day-to-day basis? So let's have a point of reflection. I'm going to give you all a few moments where I'm not actually going to speak. And I just want you to reflect on, what are your values right now, today? Okay, we're not going to do any sort of sharing activity or breakout rooms or anything like that. But, you know, just think about, what are your values today based on what you've heard so far? Let me, you know, just remind you of a couple of things. What values do you hold, or you think you hold? Think about which activities you live those values through. Which of the values do you hold that you are not currently living? Right? Remember, the values drive behaviour. So that's just a little reminder there for you now. So back to that reflection question, what do you value? There's some examples for you. Just take a few moments just to pause, reflect and think. And as you're thinking, you might be jotting some things down on some paper as well. So you might be thinking, actually, yeah, I do value routine. I do value genuineness. I do value respect for others. I do value adventure. Just jot them down, and maybe jot down next to them some of the activities that guide or that get lived through that value. All right, because remember we said value always drives the behavior. So take a few moments just to jot some things down, or just to think in your own heads. Okay, so you may have a bit of a sense now of what some of your preliminary values are. And I gave you a very short period of time, but there may be sort of 4 or 5 that you've thought about. But go away, do that full values activity. When you've got a list of somewhere between 8 to 12, what do you do with that next? People will often say to me, but Dr. Robert, I don't know where to start with this whole values thing, or difficult thoughts and feelings get in the way of me living these values. Quite simply, I don't have time. How do we deal with all of these things? Wonderful. You've got this list of 12, but then we've got these obstacles. Where do I start living these values? Difficult thoughts and feelings get in the way of me living these, or I quite simply don't have time. So let's troubleshoot and solve some of these. So become conscious of your values. Okay, so you're all going to do that as you go away from the talk today. I would say hold those in mind. Okay, so part of being aware of them and being conscious of them might be actually, you know, sort of printing them out on a sheet of paper and putting them up on your desk. Making a word cloud out of them and putting them up somewhere at home where you can see them. Changing your phone background. Many of you will see your phone background hundreds of times a day. All right, so put them somewhere where you're going to see them. To remind yourself, and it might feel a bit artificial at first, but it's really important to sort of get them into that conscious awareness. That if I say to you, what is it you value? You know, you might say, it's wealth, compassion, moderation, balance. Like, you're able to sort of name to put them somewhere, become familiar with them. We're going to talk about something called the bullseye and goal setting in a moment. You want to be reviewing your values regularly. And you know, some people will say, right, once every 12 months, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to go through that assessment activity again to see how things might have shifted. So review them regularly. And again, I'm going to talk in a moment about developing strategies to get out of your head, because it can be difficult to live values when there's lots of overthinking or rumination or high levels of stress going on up here. But we want you to be developing strategies to get out of your head so that you can start behaving now. Going back to that quote right at the start of today, the only behavior that is certain to occur is the behavior that is happening now. So if you can get out of your head and start behaving now, that's likely to serve you well. I'm going to come on to thinking about developing strategies in a moment. So this is the bullseye. Once you've got your list of values, again, you can Google values bullseye and something like this will come up. But Or you can just draw it on yourselves on a sheet of paper. But this idea of a sort of dartboard sort of format, but make a list of your values around the outside. I've only put 4 here for sort of illustrative purposes. Then plot on the bullseye. Today, how much am I living this value? So if I'm living it as fully as I possibly can, you're going to put a cross or a tick right on the inside. So if if I value ecology and I'm doing my recycling and I haven't run a deep bath and I am, as I said earlier, sort of getting the metro to work, whatever it may be, if I'm doing that every single day consistently, I'm living that value. Okay, I'm really living that value. But here you can see on my example, this isn't actually my example, it's a hypothetical example, but fitness. I haven't been to the gym for a year. I do about 2,000 steps a day, right? So I'm far away from living that value. So plot your values on this bullseye. It can be a really useful visual representation of how fully am I living my life in accordance with my values at the moment. And you want to get specific about this. You might start thinking, self-compassion, for example, may be a value that you hold. But actually, I do 1 mindfulness exercise a day, and I try not to beat myself up if my boss gives me poor feedback or whatever it may be. But actually, I don't treat my body well. I'm not getting 8 hours of sleep. So, thinking about all of the behaviors that possibly make up that concept of self-compassion, and then plotting yourself on the bullseye. As I say, when I do this with clients or clients do this themselves, this can be a really useful exercise. Why? Because where we are at the outer rings of the bullseye, this tells us we need to start doing things differently. And this is where the concept of goal setting will come in. So I haven't got a visual representation here, but I would be saying to clients, right, let's take your 3 values that you're nowhere near living fully at the moment. And let's set some goals over the next week about how you are going to live those values more fully. What does that goal look like, even if it's smaller? And the question is not how do I live it fully today or live it fully tomorrow, but how do I move it from that outer ring to 1 ring in, or that outer ring to 2 rings in? What small steps do I need to start engaging in to move closer to living that value fully? I'm going to tell you, no human being lives all of their values every single day completely fully, right? That is not the goal. It's not realistic, all right? But what small incremental goals can I set myself to be living that value a bit more consistently? And remember, the goals are always going to be the behavior. So if it is that I'm trying to move my self-compassion to living more fully, what am I specifically, behaviorally going to do that is going to indicate I'm treating myself with self-compassion? So this will be a very individual exercise for all of you to go through, but I think particularly useful. One of the questions, as I mentioned a few moments ago, was the idea that, this idea of behaving or living my values on a daily basis is great, but I spend so much time up in my head, it can be difficult to get out of my head and to come back to the present moment and get on with doing what I need to do in line with my values. And I've been in this field now, I think, for 15 years. And what I'm showing you now is the single most sort of pertinent, effective, lovely summary of, I think, all of my knowledge over the last 15 years in clinical experience. Okay, it looks very simple and straightforward. But we're going to start in the bottom left. Open up. So if it is that you are experiencing stress or anxiety or confusion or regret or grief or whatever it may be, these difficult feelings that might get in the way, open up. Become aware of them. Notice them. Give them some time. Give them some space. Feel them. Experience them. Okay? Because we don't want to shut down difficult emotions or difficult thoughts when they show up. The temptation is to want to just shut them down and get rid of them or turn the other way. I would encourage you to give some time and attention to them. So open up, feel them. Then make a deliberate choice. I'm going to come back to the present moment. Okay? So be present. So you've opened up, get back to the present moment. And you might need to ground yourself. Okay, so I notice that I'm feeling high levels of stress. Okay, do I want to be doing this now, feeling this stress? No, right? Let me ground myself back in the present moment. What can I hear? What can I see? What can I smell? What can I touch? What can I taste? Google cognitive diffusion strategies, a number of strategies that help us get out of our head and back to the present moment. Maybe I should do a separate talk on cognitive diffusion, it's a big area. But learn some strategies to be able to come back to the present moment. Now I'm back in the present moment. Go and do what matters. And that doing what matters is the behavior that is in line with your values. Okay? I was a minute or so late starting this talk today. So apologies to all of you for that. So I noticed a bit of stress and anxiety coming up in me. Oh, what are all these people going to think? They're going to be disappointed in me. Okay, make room, open up to those difficult thoughts and feelings, but then make a deliberate choice to come back to the present moment, Robbie. Okay, come back to the present moment and now go and do what matters, which is starting this talk. Because doing this talk is in line with my values, right? This idea of contribution, this idea of conscientiousness. So I'm here doing this talk because it brings me closer to the kind of person I want to be, right? So I'm doing what matters, despite the fact that I felt a bit disappointed in myself at the start of the talk. Now, I haven't let it stop me doing what I value. So I hope that's a sort of good example of how we can get out of our heads, come back, and now still continue to live a rich, full, and meaningful life in line with our values. Let's just give a quick nod to values at work, because many of you will work in a corporate space or work in an organization, and there's often, and many clients I work with, for those of you that might join late, I work fairly, not exclusively, but extensively within the corporate sector, where there is often a high level of stress, long hours, etc. And this idea of values at work often comes up. I can guarantee that if I asked you to name your company values or your organization values, you would be able to do that. Okay, these are often sort of not drilled into us, maybe that's the wrong term, but we're often made very aware of them. Many of us, though, don't have an idea about what our own personal values are. So why is this important? Well, we know, and again, the research is fairly conclusive on this, that in order for you to succeed at work or to be in employment that is meaningful and life-giving, there does need to be some alignment between the establishment or the organization's values and your individual values. There doesn't need to be a complete match. Okay, so my 10 values don't necessarily need to map completely onto the LightHouse Arabia's 10 values, but there needs to be at least some alignment, because otherwise, if there's misalignment, there may be cynicism. So I don't believe in what I'm doing at work. I don't believe in the vision that the company or organization has. And we feel a sense of disconnection or a lack of belonging. So just reflect for a moment, do you live some of your values in the workplace? And again, I don't think it's an algorithm for determining how many of your values you should be living in the workplace. But, I think if you've got a list of somewhere between sort of 10 and 12 values, and you can confidently say, actually, I'm able to live the value of creativity. I'm able to live the value of wealth because it pays well. I'm able to live the value of courtesy because when I engage with my employees, I always do it in a very courteous way. If you're able to do that for a good number, maybe 50–60% of your values, then that's pretty good alignment. What I sometimes find, though, is clients who are particularly sort of at the point of burnout, there will be a huge often mismatch between the values of the company and those of the individual. Now, companies and organizations will often have a list of what their ascribed values are, and employees will report, actually, my experience is that isn't the company's values, they are something a little bit different. So it's just really important to, I think, be aware of that. But if there is a huge misalignment, it might be that this isn't the right company or workplace for you, right? But the question to ask before you get to that point is, is there a way that I can live more of my values within this company or organization? Can I ask to be transferred to a different team or department? Can I be asked to be, staffed on a project that might allow me to live a few more of my values? Because again, going back to what we talked about earlier, those of us that live in a way that is consistent with our values generally experience greater life satisfaction and a sense of meaning. So if you can take small steps to be able to live your values more consistently at work, then that can indeed be helpful. Okay, so I've spoken for 40 minutes or so then about the concept of values. I hope that was helpful to you and giving you some things to think about. I'm going to take some questions. I can see that a number of different questions have come in on the chat box here. So thank you for those. So I'm going to take some of those now. What's the... How can one live a values-based life when values shift and change? So that's a really sensible question. I think most of us will have a core set of values that don't generally change. And again, the research would indicate that most of us have a core set of values that don't change. So that list of 10 or 12, there may be 5 or 6 that stay fairly consistent throughout life. So you're going to be acting on those 5 or 6 on a consistent basis, I would say. And again, I think this stresses the importance of reviewing your values regularly, to sort of have that list in mind of what they are. I think it's unlikely that values sort of shift, significantly day to day. It's unlikely that you have the value of sort of ecology one day and then it's completely gone the next, because remember that question we're asking is, what about yourself can you not compromise on? So maybe that you're choosing a value of fitness for a period of time, even though you're not completely bought into it. But values, although they may shift and change, don't generally do so with any great speed. It's usually more of a sort of gradual process. But again, it just stresses the importance of reviewing these regularly. Somebody's asked, can you please repeat the first point regarding your intentions and how to act on them? The gym example. Yeah, so I go back to this idea that, people will often say, I use the sort of when and then analogy. So when I feel less anxious, then I will go to the party. When I feel motivated to go to the gym, then I will. When I feel happier in my own body, then I will wear a particular clothing item or whatever it may be. So this idea of when and then, I think it's the other way around. So if I can go to the gym today, then I will start to feel motivated. So I go back to the original point, the only behavior that is destined to occur is the behavior that is happening now. So if, we are just intending to do lots of things, but we never get around to them, that generally leads, and again, the research would indicate this, to a very low level of life satisfaction. I'm not fulfilling my potential. I'm just procrastinating. I'm just putting things off. Now, some of you watching this may experience significant levels of procrastination and difficulties with fulfilling or sticking to plans or intentions. If that's the case, you might want to consult with a psychologist to develop some tools and strategies to be able to counteract that. It's not easy. I understand that for sure. But again, if I don't do this behavior now, there's a very good chance I might not do it later, or I might not do it tomorrow. I've got a presentation, a different presentation that straight after this talk, I've got to get on and do. If I don't literally just open up PowerPoint and get started, there's a good chance I won't do it later today. All right, so I literally just have to start and do that thing now. It's the only way, because often we will make good intentions but not fulfill. So if we can just muster the strength to drag ourselves to do whatever it is that might be causing us stress or anxiety, that's a good way to go. Let me take a few more questions. Okay, as a parent, how could I ensure my child understands this? Because my core value is being a good parent rather than being a conscious parent. Are there any indicators that I have to be able to pass this to my child? So firstly, I would be asking the question, what is it that constitutes a good parent? Okay, what values make up a good parent? Now, for every parent, this is going to look a little bit different. I mean, there will be some universal values, right? Probably the value of care is a fairly fundamental one to parenting. The value of sort of education, the value of safety. So these will be sort of core parenting values. I would also invite you to ask the question, as an individual parent, what are my values when it comes to parenting that others might not share? You know, I'm a parent myself, and I would say, the value of fun. And again, maybe in most families that would be a core value, but just having a laugh, not doing things too structured sometimes. So, as a parent, what are my values that I hold for parenting? And children are wonderful creatures because they will internalize a lot of those values, right? So if you as a parent are parenting in a way that, your values are about care, kindness, education, fun, excitement, balance, adventure, your child is likely to internalize those values for themselves. So again, and sometimes I might even get families to do this as a family. What are our family values? And you can do this with even quite young kids where they've got to have some degree of sort of language ability. But, what are our family values? How are we trying to act towards each other and within this family unit consistently? And, it's not necessarily a sort of stick to prod children with, but it can just help us understand that as a group, we have a shared set of values. Are we behaving or acting in accordance with these? So I hope that's helpful. I've got a question here. What are my thoughts about corporate values? And what's your advice if you find that the lived values of the corporation you work for do not sync up with your own? It's a good question. I think I spoke to this a little bit, sort of in the last slide there. I think corporations, as I said earlier, I think they will have a set of prescribed values, so what they believe and want their values to be. And as you've mentioned here, what's your experience though of what the lived values are? Because a corporation may say we have values around respect, integrity, all of these kind of things, but your lived experience of the people you come into contact with in the organization might not be that case or that way. So I would say, there's a couple of things to consider. Firstly, is there a way that I can live more of my values, despite the fact that this workplace might not be completely aligned with my values? Can I take steps? Can I set goals? Can I take the initiative to try and live more of my values within this workplace? And you might need to trial that out over a period of time, a month, a couple of months, 6 months. So get started on a new project, move a different department, change a role, whatever it may be. You may need to take initiative on that. But I would say as well, you may reach a point where you think actually there is such a misalignment between this organization and my own values that I need to go and work somewhere where my values are much more closely aligned. And this happens. Now, if it is that you're in a sort of position of responsibility, or you've been in this organization a long time and this is a really big life decision, consult with a professional. You consult with a friend or a family member, sure, but can sometimes be some real value in just meeting with a psychologist for 3 sessions, 4 sessions, 5 sessions, just to chew some of this stuff over. If it is that you are considering moving workplace and it's going to really impact your life, what's the harm in chatting that over with somebody independent to consider it from different perspectives? Because your friends and family will have some kind of view or some kind of vested interest, even if they're not necessarily aware of that. So it might be that just meeting with a professional to chew that over. If you are thinking the values of the organization and mine do not align, chatting that over with a professional. Okay, let me come to a few more questions. I think there's a few in the chat box as well. Let me have a look. Is someone's asked, is consistency a value? Yeah, I would argue it is, yeah. Because, you know, again, the value drives the behavior. So if consistency is the value, what are the behaviors that are shown through that? So it might be, you know, consistently greeting my children in the same way, or, you know, donating the same amount of money to charity, or, you know, going to whatever it is. But if consistency and predictability and routine, these are all absolutely values, for sure. Again, in the values assessment tasks, you'll find, you know, hundreds of potential different values. The list I showed is not exclusive by any means. So let's have a look at a few more questions. Yeah, so this is the question that often comes up. What do you do when you're faced with situations where your values clash with one another? Okay, so where we have sort of competing values, all right? And I think, you know, an example of this might be, you know, I value connection with my children, or I value connection with others, but I also value solitude. I value being alone. How do I balance? How do I manage those two things? And I would say the key word here is about balance. It's about giving time for both of those things. So, you know, allowing time, you know, maybe in the morning, I'm going to live that value of connection by spending an hour with my kids in the morning. But then at night, I'm going to value my solitude by having a bath on my own, or going out on the balcony and meditating, whatever it may be. So it's a case, I think, often of trying to balance those values. Now, again, I'm a human being, and I understand that that balance isn't always perfect. So we might want to value our solitude, but our children or our spouse or whatever might want to sort of interfere with that. So it's not, you know, this isn't always going to be in perfect harmony, but I would be saying, as much as possible, try and give equal time or equal weighting to those values that you hold, because you're right, sometimes they can be in sort of contradiction to one another. The other one, of course, is things like, you know, I value connection with other people, but I also value wealth. So if I've got to be at work earning lots of money because that's important, that ultimately means that one of my other values can't be lived. But again, trying to redress that balance using that bullseye that I talked about. So if it is that, you know, at the moment, connection with others is right on the outside, what small steps do I need to start taking to incrementally bring it in? That's helpful. Probably got time for one more question, so let me take this one. Can you please explain how cognitive diffusion could be used to promote values? Yeah, so cognitive diffusion is the idea that sometimes we spend a lot of time in our heads. We are very attached to the thoughts and feelings that are coming up for us. It can be very difficult to sort of diffuse things, unhook from them. So if it is that I'm having the thought that this presentation hasn't gone very well, and that thought's going over and over and over and over in my mind, it can be very difficult to come back to the present moment. But we want to be coming back to the present moment. Because as I said, in that triangle towards the end, once we're back in the present moment, now we can act on our values. And sure, that thought may come back to me, but I can still act on my values, even when there might be a bit of rumination. But if I can learn strategies to be able to come back to the present moment, and this is cognitive diffusion, the idea of unhooking from my thoughts or from my feelings, coming back to the present moment, now I can act on my values, or it becomes easier to act on my values. I can still act on my values when I am ruminating and overthinking. I can still go to the gym, even though I'm worried about doing a presentation later. I can still spend time with my kids, even though I'm worried about a meeting with my boss, whatever it may be. I can still do those things. But if I learn some cognitive diffusion strategies, that can make that process slightly easier. All right. Okay, good. So I think we're going to end there for today. I'd like to thank so many of you for turning or for tuning in today. It's been a real pleasure to spend time with you today. If you want to find out more about us here at the Lighthouse Arabia, you can see our Instagram accounts. We've got a number of different Instagram accounts. Our main Lighthouse account, our managing director, Dr. Sally Howard-Freedy, she's got an account. A couple of parenting accounts we've got, and a youth account as well. Go on our website, check out all of that kind of stuff. But listen, it's been an absolute pleasure being here with you today. If you've got any sort of follow-up questions, then please do email them in to corporate@lighthousearabia.com, and one of us will respond to you. If anything's come up in you today that you think you would like some further assistance or help with, please do reach out to us, and we'd be happy to sort of signpost or discuss with you what we might be able to provide to be able to support. All right. So yeah, I've been Dr. Robert Chandler, and it's been great spending time with you all today, and I wish you a very pleasant day ahead. All right, take care.